Nigel, thank you for joining me. I'd like to talk with you about your new book and also look into a couple ideas that you have about relevant topics that are coming up in the what we call the dark web, and things that are really pressing issues for the younger population as we're maturing into the control of this country.
Right. Okay.
So to start, I was wondering, how long have you been in the field of personal development?
Would be at least 25 years now.
25 years?
Since 1993, do the math, yeah, just over 25 years.
Okay. And has it always been in coaching?
You know, when you talk personal development, personal development starts with self.
Yeah.
And then I was running a company at the time, and I actually started a company at the same time I got involved in personal development, and I ran the business or the company based on the principles of personal development without even knowing I was doing that. So really my spiritual journey or my personal development journey started at the same time. To get into working directly with clients would be since 2008, so that's 10 years now.
Okay.
When I sold my business, in fact I had two businesses in between, sold them and then retrained, being the graduated, qualified provider of these services rather than using them in my own companies.
So you were working on an individual basis for around 10 years, and then what motivated the book?
Well, anyone who's been through a personal crisis or a life crisis, which I think is most human beings, otherwise we wouldn't be here. That's how we transition them. Depending on the depth of the crisis, we invite into our lives, unknowingly at the time, teachers and healers. So in 93 is when I went through a personal crisis, and that is when, in fact, my own teachers arrived. So the material for the book really started in 1993. So the material is 25 years in the making. Probably about 6 years ago is when I worked with my guides and my teachers in spirit. They came through and said, start writing. And sacred knowledge is not to be kept. Sacred knowledge is to be shared. And so when that instruction came through, the immediate reaction was, whoa, who am I to be able to do this? The self-doubt and all those issues around that again came up. But over time, and with a new set of teachers, we always invite teachers in whenever there's any crises. A new set of teachers came along, and being on the island of Hawaii here, certainly the energies of Hawaii, the big island, are incredibly supportive of this kind of work. And in fact, if one doesn't do the work one's called to do, regardless of where you live, Spirit has an extraordinary gift of giving us quite a hiding, a good smack. So I didn't have much choice but to get on and do this work, and hence the book manifests out of that.
So do you feel like the island brought you here so that you would bring this book out to the community? Is that a fair way of saying, or are these just synchronistic events?
Yes and yes. Okay. The island certainly supports it. There's far less what I call shiny object syndrome on the island.
Yeah.
Well, the shiny objects there are to do with a spiritual nature, a self-development, a healing nature, as opposed to, I need to get my latest iPhone, I need to get a new car, I need to get a new laptop, I need to get all these other external objects. So the energies here really support doing that work. And often people who refuse that call don't survive the island. They find themselves back on the mainland quite soon.
Yeah, so before we get into the book, I wanted to just, if you could just briefly outline your credentials.
Well, first of all, I'm human, which is always a good start. And so originally born in Tanzania, hence a funny accent. or Tanganyika in those days before the revolution, then raised in South Africa under very conservative circumstances, being apartheid.
Did being in that racial struggle, was that a formative quality to your work?
Later on it was. At the time, I felt quite happy being there. You know, as my blind spot, I'm very lucky, I'm very charmed. But afterwards, I've certainly informed the injustices that I had certainly papered over, and I think many people paper over today. So I became an electrical engineer, Bachelor of Science with honours in that. Got involved in the corporate world, did very well in the corporate world. Got involved in the computer industry, did very well there, started my own company out of that. And then found myself in Australia, ran an internet company there, bought one and ran one there, did well out of that, and then decided enough. And I sold all that up and went and retrained as a transpersonal counsellor in Sydney. And that was in 2008. And that's what I do today, really, the transpersonal counseling, coaching, writing, and because of my corporate executive background, I also do that facilitation for corporate groups, and specifically for executives.
Yeah, so, and now I want to start getting into the book, and you said that there's an event of crisis that was a major shift in your direction. Is that, I mean, when you say the word crisis, it sounds like it should be a very crystal clear event. But is it always like that? I mean, like a divorce or a death or something like that, or because no.
Well, yes and no again. I believe that each of us are here on planet Earth for a reason, and whether we know that or not depends on our own spiritual awakening. Most of us don't know that. In my case, I was so distracted by the corporate world, by the material world, that spirit was knocking, saying, wake up. I ignored that. My ego became absolutely rampant. I was in my mid-30s, a director of a big organization, and it was wonderful until one day Spirit said enough, and I then got dismissed for becoming unmanageable in that organization. So it can either be a gentle, slow decline, or comes along, it can be a sharp cutoff. In my case, it was fairly sharp cutoff, although I'd been building and building and building over quite a while. Other people, it can just be a sudden car accident, very sudden, sharp off. Others can be a dysfunctional marriage or relationship, which is just a slow decline until eventually you get to a point of saying, I don't want this anymore. And we get to that point of metaphorical death where nothing really matters.
So in a sense, it's almost like there's mercy in having a singular traumatic event, because it's the ripping off the Band-Aid. Probably didn't seem that way when you were going through it.
No, I can believe me, it doesn't seem that way at the time. It's that the work which Stanislaus Grof does, a psychologist who now lives in Marin County.
Who's the founder of holotropic breathwork?
Correct, yeah. And he calls it spiritual emergency. And you've got to go through spiritual emergency or spiritual crisis before the spirit can emerge. So I say to you, if you look at the letter Y on the end of emergency, you do your inner work, find out what that Y is it there, remove the Y, and you end up with spiritual emergence. And you remove the Y. And that Y sometimes can be very painful to handle. In my case, it was coming out as a gay man. It was in very homophobic South Africa, very conservative. And again, being a director of a large corporation, I was expected to arrive at functions, black tie functions, with my wife. Always a challenge. In fact, a major challenge. So I had women I could take with me, and that seemed to satisfy everyone except myself. So spirit was knocking and knocking and knocking. We call it the knock of spirit. It knocks on the door. You either answer it or you ignore it. I ignored it for so long, till age 35, and then it was just a blast. Coming out the closet was just a chaotic period. It was a very destructive period, and that's the most dangerous time in people's lives. If they don't answer the knock of spirit, it can lead to depression, lead to anxiety, lead to bipolar disorders lead to schizophrenic type disorders. We end up leading double lives, and there's this lack of inner peace, lack of integration within self. So in my case, everything just crashed. I lost my house, I lost my cat, I lost my job, all within a week, and the whole lot went down.
This was a result of not conforming to what we call like a binary system. I mean, so I guess the crisis that you had is interesting in the time that we live in now, because maybe 100 years ago the possibility of coming out as a gay man wasn't even on the table, and maybe in 100 years being gay would be irrelevant. So this avenue of crisis is very unique to this current period where we're going through acceptance of the what we call a queer community.
Yeah, whilst I use that as my example, well, not my own story, because I didn't talk about my own story, each person being born human has what I call, their crisis can be something very small or can be something very major. Mm-hmm. The bigger it is, the more dangerous it is towards suicide. Mm-hmm. And that is the ultimate metaphorical death, is suicide. We don't want to go there. Yeah. But when you're in that space, it doesn't matter how many people tell you it's okay. One has to walk that journey alone. Yeah. And in the Toltec teachings, the spiritual teachings, they have a term for that, and it's called the loneliest place on earth. So when you make a decision to step off the known world, in my known world, in my example, and you can draw your own examples out of this, was the safe world of conforming and complying, which I have in my book around that on the Matrix, a path to freedom model there. Conforming and complying and playing the game of the heterosexual corporate world. When I said that no longer worked for me, and at the same time I overcame that sense of meaninglessness, which comes often as a result of religious indoctrination upbringing. So I had on one hand conforming and complying to corporate laws, corporate rules, expectations of being straight at an executive level, and then also the country itself, which I could have been jailed had I come out in South Africa at the time. And look at many countries around the world, Muslim countries, conservative countries, that still exists. Yeah. Even the US is only, 5 years old now that we've actually done away with those laws, and there are people still trying to reinforce them. We look at the argument today about the Supreme Court judge, right as of this moment we speak, a conservative man. The gay community or even the Me Too women's community are concerned that we go backwards. Right. So on the one hand, you've got laws to conform and comply. Then you also got this very deep religious upbringing, which is indoctrination, which is without consent. The young child, going right back from baptisms or christenings, without their consent, is given a religious teaching. And with that, I believe we lose our spirituality, because we layer upon man's regulations, man's rules, on top of that of how we should behave. So when you're in a space, and the model is a two-dimensional model, conformance and compliance on the one hand, which is fear-based and fear-controlled, and then the soul energy or the soul aspect, who you are as an integrated being, is stripped away from you into a meaningless existence. That separation in that quadrant is where total control takes place. In that quadrant is where you can actually manipulate people to become good corporate pawns. In that quadrant is when people go to war and fight for you and die for your man-made rules in order to keep the 1% wealthy, and so on. So that's where about 90% of the population are well entrenched here. But most of those people are, a lot of those people, I wouldn't say most, a lot of those people are feeling very uncomfortable. Something has to give. In my case, my crisis was about sexual orientation. Another could be about I'm in the wrong relationship. Another could be on the wrong job. Another could be I'm just not feeling I fit into this town I'm living in. It doesn't really matter what it says. We each have our own journey. It doesn't mean that one person's journey is worse or better than the other. So it's no point me saying, well, I went through a real crisis bigger than your crisis is ever going to be. Right. That's just ego getting back in the way again. Right. And the whole idea of crises is to strip oneself of ego. When you strip yourself of ego is when the true spirit can come through, the soul aspect comes through, and you start reconnecting. In that reconnection is where that inner peace comes in, and inner peace is where freedom is.
So one of the things, like the theme that kind of goes through the whole book is letting people see where they are stuck. And I would say the biggest theme is around awareness. So
Right.
it's you might feel unhappy in your life, but you're not sure why you're stuck. You don't and you can't figure it out. So one of the things that was helpful that I saw was having examples of emotions that kind of guide you into seeing like where you might be on this
Right.
model, and then it's like you can't use a map unless you know where you are right now.
Right.
Otherwise, the map is no good.
Yeah. So on that, okay, I forgot we actually have the model here.
Yeah. So, but you were saying that you would say around 90% of people are in the
What I call the third quadrant here,
okay.
which is where it's a combination of fear-based conformance and compliance, rules and regulations. We have this extraordinary dichotomy, almost a schizophrenia in the US. We call ourselves the land of the free. We're also the most litigious land in the world. How can you be free when you're the most litigious?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. Whereas ancient Europe, for example, there are unspoken rules which you don't need laws to enforce. That's just part of the DNA. So we're a young country, same as Australia, where I spent many years, and South Africa. Same kind of thing. But it's that combination of fear-based conformance and compliance together with that separation from what I call soul energy. And in that combination is where we have that total control. And we give away our power in that place. And if we can be held in that place, we can be manipulated. So it's when the soul self or the spirit says, I don't want to be there anymore, this is not serving me, I'm feeling unhealthy with that, is when we break through. Now to get back to your question of where are you on the model, it's hard to see it. So what I've done here is included at each of the extreme corners emotions. And we can typically relate to emotion. Now in that place of entrapment or total control, the emotion there would be hate, anger, resentment, and powerless. And I think a lot of people today are feeling quite powerless. And we're seeing that reaction more and more in people as we're getting that separation of the 1 or 2 percenters to everyone else. The rest are feeling quite powerless. Because the other end of that, on the extreme side, is love, happiness, and compassion. However, the challenge is there's no direct connection between the two. One actually has to travel through the model to get there. And the only connection that brings us to it
So
is
you're saying
crisis.
you can't just think happy thoughts?
Thinking happy thoughts is wonderful. I'm all for it, but I'm more for dealing with the shadow.
Yeah.
That thing which stalks us, which says, I am here. If you don't take care of me, I am going to keep on knocking until you do take care of me, or I'm going to drag you right down and break your life so you do finally notice me. And in the shamanic Toltec teachings, they call that the art of stalking, how the shadow stalks us and how we have to pay attention.
So the term that comes to mind is a spiritual bypass, and I see this a lot in the community. Is that it's I don't have problems. It's just everything is one, and it's all love and light, and that's not. It seems like a lip service to burying your head in the sand, and what you're suggesting is that that's not really a way to solve the problem.
Interesting term used, bypass. Yeah, I can go with that. I'd say denial.
Denial, right.
And I'm a little bit more critical. I call, especially in the 80s, 90s, I don't know when it was, we had the Love and Light Brigade, all the New Age movement.
Yeah.
And everyone went along and spent a huge amount of money on becoming love and light and hugging trees and what have you, and no one got any better. Again, because I believe we're not dealing with the shadow, that part of us. And I call the shadow that real deep sense of soul, who we are, which is waiting to be noticed, is waiting to be acknowledged. And when we integrate with that is when we find that inner peace. Because the shadow has enormous wisdom, has huge healing. Don't pay attention, it would be absolutely ruthless and destructive. Again, we go back to the bypass. We have the happiness industry. It's growing in leaps and bounds. What's growing in leaps and bounds as well is depression.
Right.
What's going on here?
Right.
someone's making a lot of money out of people's misery. And why is this not resolving this underlying issue? And again, I believe it's because we're not paying attention to the true soul aspect, which is the top of the model here, the soul energy, the integration of I am. Instead, we're paying attention to how can I feel more what they call inner peace, but it's how do I get the courage to break away from the fear-based life I'm leading. Just having courage is not enough. We've got to do our inner work as well to reconnect with that soul aspect, to do the shadow work. The two together, when we have courage, together with the inner work, integration with the God within me, the divine spirit within me, the two together, when they come together, we find that place of inner peace. And one without the other is not easy. And our environment conspires to keep us away from that place. Evangelical world, what we're talking about here is complete blasphemy to them.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's okay. If they're happy there, that's fine. A lot of people are happy being in that quadrant 3, and that's fine.
Well, they're not happy, right?
They're content. It suits them.
It's almost like they don't know how miserable they are in a sense, right?
True.
But they're not happy.
And as I say, ignorance is bliss sometimes.
Right.
So the danger of the work I do, and other people do as well, not just me alone, is we shine a spotlight into that miserable world, and then they become unhappy. Then they fight back, and they crawl back underneath a rock. That's where they're comfortable. So I'm saying, if one believes in the Eastern philosophies, Buddhism and Hinduism, things like that, where reincarnation is part of their model, they're just going to come back and do it over and over and over. I don't want to come back and do it over again.
Right.
I want to deal with what I came to deal with. And really interesting as well, as the miracle of modern medicine keeps this physical body alive for a lot longer, it's a huge benefit in our spiritual work, that, because what it does, it means that we can deal with what we came in to deal with and still have a physical body to take on another layer without dying. And whoa, I've still got this physical body, take another layer. So we can literally have 3 or 4 lifetimes of karmic resolution in one physical incarnation now. And the beauty of that, of course, is we don't forget everything we learnt from the previous one. And we can build upon that, and that becomes faster and faster. So I urge your generation, younger people, get in there, do it, because there's such massive supportive energies today to support people doing this work.
Yeah, so you mentioned power, and also in the book, Appointments in Power. So could you describe, what do you mean by power?
Power is one of those intangible things. What do I mean by that? Again, going back to the Toltec teachings, there's a concept of known, the unknown, and the unknowable. Now the known world, I know I'm sitting here, I know I'm talking to you, to the camera, I know we're going to make this a beautiful view behind us of the ocean. I know there's a table, I know I'm in Hawaii, the known world. You have your known world, and our known worlds overlap, and so on. The unknown is stuff which we can still learn. The path I'm on now, the last 25 years ago was totally unknown to me.
Right.
It's now become known. People watching this and listening to this, for them it's an unknown, they're taking it on, will become a known. We have a huge capacity to know. What I mean by that is, most people are aware of the idea of the auric field around us, the auric cocoon. That has got a massive capacity to hold energy and to create realities within that space. The movie The Matrix, of course, showed that very beautifully, how we create different realities. So the unknown is a massive area to explore. The known is very narrow, and we're controlled in the known world again by quadrant 3. Move out of it, and we can explore the unknown. The unknowable, again, according to Toltec teachings, is that beyond who we are, beyond, in my auric field, my boundary of knowledge is this thing here. My boundary of experience is this thing here. There's stuff outside of me, which I'm told there's stuff outside of me. I can't know it. The concept of God is an unknowable concept. So we have lots of words. We have God, divine presence, sacred spirit, eternity, all these things. It's unknowable. But what do we do as man? We go along and label it as though we know it. That's ego speaking. Down here again, all ego. and then we go to war about it and we kill each other over an unknowable concept. If ever there was madness in the world, that's it. Complete madness. So where does power come into this, your question? Power, they say, is an attribute of the unknown. Okay, let's get your head around that.
An attribute of the unknown?
Yeah, it's an attribute of God, attribute
Or
of
the
divine
unknowable.
presence. Sorry, the unknowable.
Yeah.
Quite right, the unknowable. It's an attribute of the unknowable. So we can feel power, we can never know power. We can experience it, we can never own it.
Okay.
Okay, so we're talking about power. So we know when it's present. An appointment in power is when that attribute, and as we're sitting here, power stepping in. That's how power works. And I know stepping in because I go all chicken skin. Okay? And so we're now being visited by power, by an attribute of the unknowable. And in that can only happen when we still our mind or get out of our own way, is when we become pure channels of light, of spirit, of God, whatever you want to call it. You know, the Conversations with God, those books, they're great books for that. So power as well, also in the shamanic Toltec teachings, power, not only is it unknowable, it's also a female affair, female energy. Maybe females are unknowable. Maybe that's the same thing, I don't know.
Totally accept that.
Okay, so maybe the two go together. Whereas on the other hand, so the men don't freak out, strength is an attribute of the male energy. So we have yin and yang, power and strength or focus. We have Shakti in the Hindu philosophy, which is power, and we have Shiva, which is focus, or the director. Lord Shiva is the masculine energy. So within each and every one of us, we have an element of both power and strength, the focus. We choose to incarnate here with a certain energy body. And you've come as a man, I've come as a man. We've come with a certain pattern, if you want to call it that, to experience life. And what stands next to us, or the shadow aspect or part of who we are, which we need to reconnect with, is the other part, which is split off when we came in. And I'll talk about that in the book, that aspect which we reconnect with. In my case, whilst I'm a gay man, I still embody male energy. So what stands next to me, if I was a straight man, it would be a female form standing next to me, embodying female energy. By being a gay man, it's a male form standing next to me, but that form embodies female energy. So that's how power works. So we each, when we do an appointment in power, is we go into that space, and in the definition, a huge part of it is the space of non-judgment. As soon as we go into judgment, guess what happens? We have to defend our position. As soon as we start defending our position, guess what happens? We give away our power, arguing about something. Who cares? If you don't believe what I'm saying, it's actually really not my business. It's really your choice to believe me or not. I can't make you believe me. So for me to give away my power, making you believe what I'm saying, is absolutely, as Eckhart Tolle would say, it's absolutely madness. What's the point?
So when we talk about shadows and shadow work, I can't help but feel like there's a certain negative connotation to that. But the way you're making it sound is that the shadow is just this unknown aspect of yourself.
Again, interesting, negative and positive are judgment words.
Right, but the word shadow itself feels like, you know, when people work in the shadows, it just sounds like something criminal maybe, or something that you want to run away from. The shadows are scary.
So where are we sitting at the moment? We're sitting in the shadow of this beautiful gazebo away from the hot sun.
Right, protecting us.
Protecting us. So we got to watch what I hear what you say. I have to acknowledge that we do put meaning onto different labels. And as soon as we label something, we're judging it.
Yeah, I bring that up because I feel like some people might hesitate or, you know, be concerned about getting into shadow work.
Right.
You know, that might, shadow work sounds scary or uncomfortable.
So what happens when you get into shadow work? We end up having to go into a space which is unfamiliar. The energy you're talking about there is fear once again.
Yeah.
So as long as I'm comfortably numb, Pink Floyd had that beautiful song, Comfortably Numb, I can stay in a place of fear. I numb myself down. I might take alcohol, I might take drugs, I might use sex, I might use anything to distract me from having to do my inner work. Spirit is still knocking, because spirit is who I really am. That part of me is knocking all the time, all the time. It takes courage to find that independence and liberation from that fear and that courage. So the spiritual path is not a path for sissies.
Right.
We're talking about a spiritual warrior. It means we have to make commitment. And again, it's called the loneliest place on earth for a reason. Once we make that commitment, only we can walk it. We can have lots and lots of people walk next to us, but no one can do the work for us.
Yeah.
We have to work ourselves.
And